Shulam Aleichem, everybody. Today's daf is daf Yud Aleph, but we start from daf Yud Amud Beis. We're up to the very first wide line on daf Yud Amud Beis. Omer Rabbi Babarchon Omer Rabbi Yoel. Mai dichsiv. Was steht in Pasuk? Ki yesharim darchei Hashem v'tzadikim yelchu bam u'poishim yikashlu bam. Hashem's ways are yesharim, yashar. They're straight. Tzadikim yelchu bam u'poishim yikashlu bam. Zog di Gemara, Rabbi Yoel said, Mashal l'shnei bnei Adam. It's a mashal to two people who were Shetzalu Pescheyem, they were roasting their carbon Pesach. Echad mem achal Hashem mitzvah. One ate it l'shem mitzvah achilas carbon Pesach. The echad achal Hashem kechila gasa, and the other ate it l'shem achila gasa. Yeah, you just enjoyed it, it's a delicacy. Okay. So zesh achal Hashem mitzvah tzadikim yelchu bam. The zesh achal Hashem achila gasa poishim yikashlu bam. So immediately you can be doing the same act, Rabbi Yochanan says, and tzadikim yelchu bam poishim yikashlu bam. The zel bezach, Hishai Hanavi says, Yesharim darchei Hashem tzadikim yelchu bam poishim yikashlu bam. Amalei Shlokish, Rasha Karislei. You're calling him a Rasha and Yid La'av Mitzvah Nocher Pesach Mikachol. Mila Kachol, didn't he eat the carbon Pesach? Why is he called a Rasha? Simply because he didn't have kavana for the mitzvah. Lamaisa is eating the carbon Pesach. It's a Maisa mitzvah. You can't call him a Rasha. Hello, Mosh l'shnei b'adam zeh ishta v'choisei ime b'bayis. V'zeh ishta v'choisei ime b'bayis. He has his wife and a sister-in-law, or and a sister, in the same house. Echad is damne lo ishtoi, ve'echad is damne lo choisei. So one was nizdamne lo ishtoi, he had bia with his wife, which is a bia shel heter, mekayim mitzvahs oino, so mitzvah too, and the other is nizdamne lo choisei by mistake, and there's an isser karis. So zeshen is damne lo ishtoi tzadikim yelchu bam, v'zeh is damne lo choisei poishim yikashlu bam. So Gemara says, mi dami? How can you compare this pasuk to that case? Anan kamin echad derech. We're talking about the same road, the same path. The tzaddik goes, and he's a tzaddik. The pesheya goes, and he is nichshel. He becomes a pesheya. The same path. But over here, lemaisa, this guy was with his wife, and the other guy was with his sister. Talking about loit ishtei b'noisav. The pasuk is referring to the same act, and yet henshin eskavnu l'shem mitzvah tzadikim yelchu bam, hu shen eskavnu l'shem avedu poishim yikashlu bam. Whereas if dilma hu nami l'shem mitzvah mechaven, maybe he also is mechaven l'shem mitzvah. Rabbi Yochanan kol ha'pasuk hazeh l'shem avedu ne'amar. The whole pasuk teaches us that Lot was really shotav bezima. His mind was focused on znos. Yeah? Vayisa Lot. Lot raised, I guess he raised himself. And where do you find this lashon vayisa? Elsewhere in the context of znos. Vatisa eishes adoyne v'saineho. Right? Es einov. So also vatisa. So you have vatisa in the context of znos. So the vayisa is a reference. It's hinting that Lot was also shatav bezima, just like Eishes Potifar. Es Einav, when it says Es Einav by Lot, where do we find the mention of Einayim in the context of Znos? Vayar Meshimshin Oisa Kachli Kihi Yashra Be'einai, and Vayar, and he saw. What do you find seeing in the context of Znos? Vayar Oisa Shchem Bechamor, it's called Kikayard and Kibad Isha Zoynat Kikar Lachem. Kichula Mashkem. So the Kikar Yarden, again, another word, is a remez lazima because we find in Mishlei, Kiba'ad Isha Zoyna, person is chasing znus at Kikar Lochem. It will lead him to become such a poor person that he will be missing even a piece of bread. So you see, Kikar is the word that's mentioned by znus as well. Kichula Mashka. Yeah, is also a remez for znus because ilcha acharei ma'avi noisnei lachmi umay metzamri pishti shamni v'shikuyoi. So you see over there, shikuya means mashka, and that's in the context of znus as well. So lamaisa, you see, There's 5 different words: Vayisa, Einav, Vayar, Kikar, and Mashke. All these words are Bekesher Luznos. Vedu Gemara, 1 second, slow down. The story with Lot and his daughters is they got him drunk and he fell asleep and they did what they did. So Vadmenasanis, Lamaisa, they got him drunk and he fell asleep and they did B'shas he was sleeping. That's when it happened. Because Tanim Shem B'Yisrael Chayni, Laman Nokut Alvov Shebekuma Shalbechira. It says, V'lo Yoda B'Shichva Uvakuma. Yeah, so why does it say, why does it have the Kudais on top of the Vov in the Sefer Torah of the Vakuma by the older daughter who was with Lot? You're right. When the B'Shas Bia, when he was asleep, he didn't realize. Bakuma, when he awoke, he realized what happened. Okay, let bygones be bygones. It was already done. He should have been afraid. He should have been cautious the next night when his younger daughter tried to get him drunk. Okay, so you see, Lamaisa, he was a Pisheya, Pashim Kashlubam is referring to Lot, and the Tzaddikim are referring to his daughters who were the Shem Mitzvah. Daughter Shrabe, Maidich Sev, Ach Nifsha Mekirias Oiz Midyonim, Kibriach Armoin, Ach Nifsha Mekirias Oiz Zeloit, Ach Nifsha, a brother, right? He was a nephew, who was Nifsha Mekirias Oiz Zeloit, Shapirish Mavrom. Avrom was a Kiryas Oiz, when he was a strong Kirya, and Lot, his nephew, his brother, was separating himself from him. Lot basically triggered all these machloikas and ben Yisrael la'amoin, between Klal Yisrael and Amoin, because now it says shenemar lo yovoi amoinim yovi b'kahal Hashem. Dorashav v'temer Rabbi Yitzchak mai tichsiv l'tavo yivakish nifrad b'chol tushia yizgalo l'tavo yivakish nifrad loit shnifrad ma'avrom. Lot separated himself from Avram because he wanted to be mamalis tavis ta'arayis. So he decided to go to Zdaim. B'chol tashir yizgalo shenizgalo kloinoi bebate knesios ubebate midrashos. Yeah, now we're talking about him, 2025 as we're learning Horayos, and we're talking about the znus and the pshia of Lot that nana moinim me'avi asurin isur olam. Yeah, even the Mishnah in Yevamas, it says, they cannot be misguided themselves, we don't accept them. That's it, that's what happened. Unbelievable. He made one choice, he turned to Zdaim to go be Mamala Tavaisav, and forever and ever his Aveda echoes in Bate Knesias and Bate Midrashas, where we darshan, Amoini Mayavi Asurin, Bavi Bekal Hashem. Tomar Zinsa, the Zimri Zina. You have 2 people. Again, we're on the theme of Tzadikim Yelchuba Pashim Mikashlo, which means you can have 2 people do the same act, and one is a mitzvah and the other is an avera. Tomar Zinsa, the Zimri Zina. Tomar Zinsa, Yatzim and Malachim and Aviyah. Yeah, she had Malachim and Aviyah. She was Zoichet to have Malchus Beis David and Yeshaya Novi. Zimri Zina, Naflu Kamer Avavas Mi Yisrael. Zimri was Mizana. L'shem Avera, and 24,000 Yidden died as a result. Yeah, G'doyle Avera L'shma, me mitzvah shaloi l'shma. It's greater to do an Avera. Avera L'shma is greater. Avera L'shma is greater than a mitzvah that is done shaloi l'shma. Shenemar, because we find by Yoel Shechever Akeni, it says Tavoidach Minoshim. Right? Yoel is more blessed than the Noshim. Who are the Noshim? Mani Noshim Ba'il? Sorif Karachel Valeya. Asks the Gemara, Eini V'Omer, Avidav Rav Loim Yasek Admotav Mitzvah L'Shlei L'Shma. B'Toich Shlei L'Shma, Ba'al L'Shma. So you see, there's a Maila in doing a Mitzvah Shlei L'Shma. So why are you pitting Mitzvah Shlei L'Shma against Aveda L'Shma and saying Gedoy L'Aveda L'Shma? Take a look at the godless of a Mitzvah Shlei L'Shma. It leads to a Mitzvah L'Shma. Says the Gemara, Ema can Mitzvah Shlei L'Shma. It's not that Aveda L'Shma is greater than a Mitzvah Shlei L'Shma. It means that each one has their own milas. It's Mitzvah Shlei L'Shma. Amar Rabbi Yoel Hashem Bilas Bolei Serasha Bois Shah. 7 Beilas Yoel was Boil Sisra. Shenemar bein ragla kol nafal shacha v'goymar. Yeah, Chazal darshan. There are 7 beilos that happened there. Fredi Gemara v'kamasanya ma'avera. How can you call it gedoyle avera lishma? You're using the word lishma. Fredi Gemara. Yeah, if she's neshana from the avera, how can the pasuk praise her and call it lishma? Yeah, Gemara's kasha is not else. Gili Horayos requires her to let herself be killed. No, that we know. Tosfos and Kama Makaimis and Shas says she's karka olam. There's no problem with that. The shaila is over here. How could you call it gedoyle aveda lishma? Omer Rabbi Yoel v'Shem Shimon Yechoy afilu tavas b'shal Shalom roya etzel tzadikim. Any ano, yeah, that she had, it was raw. She bechlal wasn't machshav that ano at all. For her, the ganze kavana was l'shem shamayim. It was mamish l'shma l'shem shamayim. Even with the hano that she had, that hano was a raw to her, and the memela was completely l'shma. What do you see that shebeschar arboim shonayim karbonos shehikri bolak harosha zachar yatzam menaros? Yeah, avad the bolak intended shaloi l'shma. Right? He wasn't makrivet. L'shem Shemai fakert. He was makrivet l'kal as Yisrael. So it was it's a mitzvah to bring the karbonos l'shem Hashem, but for the purpose of being with Kal Yisrael. But yet, Zochav Yatzisem and Rus, you see Rus came out of him. Dom Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Rus bas Bnei Eglon. She was the granddaughter of Eglon Melech Moav, who was the grandson of Balak Melech ben Bnei Shel Balak Melech Moav. So you see a mitzvah Shaloi L'Shma, Balak bringing 42 karbanas. Zacha v'yatzisam imen Rus. Okay, Amar Chib Rabam Rabbi Yochanan, Menayin She'Hakadosh Baruch Hu mekapech afilu schar schicha. How do we know that Hashem rewards a person even for a diber katan, just one word of lashon nakiya, of a clean lashon? Yeah, mahacha. What do you see that from here? The ilu bechira, the karya moyav, the bechira, the older daughter, who called her son moyav, which means me'av. She was mezana with her father. Don't wage war, right? Don't lay siege and don't wage war against them. But the Gemara says, it sounds like we're not allowed to lay siege or wage war, but but we can be mitzar them. But the younger daughter, she didn't call her Me'av, right? She called her B'lashon Nakiya. She called her son B'lashon Nakiya, Ben Ami. Amar lei al tetzurem. V'al tizgerbam klal. Don't be matzar them either. I feel it's loy. Don't matzar them either, which means it was mida connected mida, right? She treated her father with respect. She was matmin. She hid the fact that this child came from a union between her and her father. So the Rebbe said, treat her descendants with respect as well. This was the reward for the sichana. Person should always be a zariz to go and do a dvar mitzvah. Why? Shebeschar laila achas shekodma bechira letziro zachsa kadmata arba doris lemalchus. Right? They were l'shem mitzvahs and skavnu. So because the older daughter was makdim, she preceded her younger sister in doing this mitzvah, or whatever, in her mind it was a mitzvah. Yes, so also Mida Keneged Mida, she was koidem in having one of her descendants marry into Klal Yisrael, right, which was Rus, that led to Malchus Beis David. But Namo Aminus, the descendant of the younger daughter, only married into Klal Yisrael 4 generations later when she married Rechavam, the son of Shlomo HaMelech. But either way, it's very interesting that we're learning la'olam yaktim odom ledvar mitzvah from an act which objectively was not a mitzvah. It was only subjectively was a mitzvah. Very interesting. She got rewarded for that. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Steht there Ma'am Oretz, Prat la Mashiach, Ma'am Oretz, Prat la Nasi. Yeah, Me'am. Me'am Oretz is Mamayit, a few people. Who's a Mamayit? Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a regular chatas of a kisbeh seira like anybody else, and also he brings a par, we saw, and the Nasi brings a soyer. Well, the Kvar Yatsu asks the Gemara, what do you mean? There's two separate parshis for Kohen Mashiach and a Nasi. I don't need in the chatas yochid a dirosha from Am Oretz to exclude them. So the Gemara says, no, Sheyachol Mashiach al helam dovrim sheyas ma'isa maybe par. The parsha is talking about when there's a helam dover, he paskins by mistake for himself that he's allowed to eat chayla, for example, and he follows through with an act. Yeah, the ma'isa veda. That's when I thought maybe par, maybe that's where the parsha is mechayiv in par. But al shigas ma'isa luchadei maybe kizba seira. Talmud loyma mei am oretz prat l'mashiach u'mei am oretz prat l'nosi. So that's why it says mei am oretz to exclude the kohen Mashiach even when he's a shigas ma'isa. He doesn't bring anything. He doesn't bring a kizba seira like a regular yachid. I understand a kohen Mashiach el nasi, but a nasi b'shigas ma'isa the ma'isa. He anyways brings b'shigas ma'isa. That's the whole parsha by a nasi. A nasi doesn't need helam davar first. So why do I need another miyat of me'am oretz prat l'nasi? Omer av zvid mishmei dravach ma'skinon kegoy she'achol kazayis chelev kshu hedi v'nesman v'achakach noideloi. Right, he ate a kazayis chelev when he's a hedyet, and then he was appointed as nasi. And only afterwards did he find out that he was chayta. I would have thought, since you ate the kazayis b'shas, you're a hedyet. Yeah, so Mamela, you should bring chatas yachid, a regular chatas yachid. Kemash malan, no. That even when you did the chet, when you were a hedyet, but if the idea came about when you were already a nasi, meyam ha'aretz, you don't bring the carbon of chatas yachid, a kizbah seira. Someone says, oh, very nice. I understand if you go like a pshiman that you need the chet and the idea to happen in the same status. In other words, he has to be in hedyet, even b'shas yediyah. El rabbanan the ozla b'sachato. But if they say you always go b'shas ma'isa aveira, so here, if he ate the chaylev, if he did it b'shas, he's a hedyet. Even if he became a nasi and he found out later that when he's a nasi, rabbanan say you still bring a regular kizbah seira. He's not the smite from the parsha of Chatas Yachid. So Michael and Meimar, why do you need a miyat of Me'am Oretz by a Chatas Yachid? First he ate a Chatzik Zayis Chayla when he's a hedyet. And then he was Nesmana as a Nasi. And then he had another Chatzik Zayis. I would have thought that it could be mitzdarif. Can be mitzdarif. Can be mitzdarif the chatzik zayis of a hedyet, the chatzik zayis of a nasi, and he'll have to bring a kizbah seira like a hedyet. Kamash malan that he doesn't bring a kizbah seira like a hedyet. He never brings it, even when a chelik of the aveda chatzik zayis happened b'shas he was a hedyet. Okay, very interesting. Because lamaisa, in order for it to be mitzdarif, you have to eat it b'chdei achilas pras. And here you're telling me Ed Chatzik Zayis, but he was a hedyet, and then he was appointed or anointed as king, right? Coronated as king, and then he ate the other Chatzik Zayis. I guess it had to take in a matter, had to happen, whatever the Achilas process, 3 to 4 minutes, it had to happen in a very short period of time, this whole thing. Okay, but either way, this is the prat, Me'am Oretz prat l'nasi is, don't think that the Chatzik Zayis that ate as a hedyet is mitzdarif, the Chatzik Zayis that ate as a nasi, and he would bring a regular Chatas Yachid. Don't think like that. Okay, what happens if the Nasias is mafsik between two achilas? Yeah, between the two achilas of Chatzik Zayis. Hey, Chadam, you can go and ochel Chatzik Zayis chelak kshu hedyet. Lamaisi ed Chatzik Zayis when he's a hedyet. The Nesmana, and he was appointed as a Nasi. The Ovar, and then he was removed from this Nasias. The Shlima, and then he had another Chatzik Zayis. So now, it's different. Now he had both Chatzik Zayis and B'shas he was a hedyet. Two bookends of the Nasias. Before the Nasias and after the Nasias. He had Chatzik Zayis on both ends. So perhaps that's mitzdarif. That's more likely to be mitzdarif because he ate each Chatzik Zayis as a hedyet. So the Gemara says also mitzdarif the achle palgak shehedi palgak shunasi. Avalach the idik shehedi achle mitzdarif like we just said. Or don't malishna, it doesn't matter. Lamaisa was Nasias in the middle and that's mafsik mai. What's the halachas? The Gemara says I have a raya. Rabbi Rabbi Yoel says, "Achal chaylev v'fish carbon." A guy ate chaylev b'shaygig, and his mafish separates a carbon chatas, kizber seira, carbon chatas, vehemer, and then he's OTD, goes off the derech, he becomes a momer. Now the halach is a momer, his carbona is puzzle. Now the chazer boy, and then he was chayzer b'tshuva. So the Gemara says, "Hoyul v'nidcha yidacha." You can't bring that carbon anymore. Why? Because since there was a period in time where that carbon became possible for him to bring, it's not kosher even after his chayzer b'shuv anymore. So here too, once he became a nasi, he couldn't bring a kizba seir anymore, right? So memela, you can't be mitztayer v'chatzi kizayis from before. Mumer can't bring a carbon altogether. Hi, barasuya carbon. When he became a nasi, he wasn't nitcha from bringing a carbon. It's just the carbon, the type of carbon that he would bring changed. Instead of bringing a kizba seira, he has to bring a soyer. So memela, there was never a point in time that he was disqualified from bringing a carbon altogether. There was a time he was always able to bring a carbon. It was just a different kind of carbon. So perhaps it's mitzdarif. So the Gemara doesn't answer really this shaila. Boy menei Rab Zedem Rab Sheshes, similar shaila. Ochel safek chaylev kshehedyet v'nesmane v'noidule al sveikoi mahu. What's the halacha with regard to an Asham Tali? Here we're not talking about Chatas Vada anymore, because B'Seira we're talking about an Asham Tali. So in other words, a guy ate Safek Chaylev, right? And then he was Nesmana Lanasi. Okay, Nasi also brings an Asham Tali. V'noidele al sveikoi, and then he found out about a Safek. Now, what's the halacha? Does he bring the Asham Tali or not? I'll leave the Rabban the Oslo Basa Chatole to Boilach. According to Rabbanan, you always go Basa Shas Chet the Maisa Avada the Maisa Asham Tali. He brings the Asham Tali because the Shas Chet he was a hedyet. Alakita Boilach leave the Reb Shimon. According to Reb Shimon, that it holds that you have to go Basa Yediyah as well. It's not just Shas Chet is not enough. You need the Yediyah plus the Chet to be Keveya to trigger the Chiyav Chatas. So here you have a Shaila. Mideshtani Lavadai. Once you see he becomes a Nasi, right? The Chatas Vadai changes. He doesn't bring a Chatas Vadai because V'Seira like a hedyet. He brings a sire. So Mideshtani Lavadai, so that is a simon that he was Nishtana. Nishtana L'Safik. So therefore, he's Nishtana also L'Safik, and he doesn't bring a Nashim Tali more because he's a different person right now. Idoma, no, ki Ishtana Lavadai, Ishtana carbon today. Avalach Ishtana carbon today. Emalai Sashim Tali. Yeah, the carbon changed, but he's still the same person. So, Shaila is it then in the Gavre and then the Chefza? Yeah, do we say that once you find that the Nasi brings on a Chatas Vadai, he brings a Sawyer, which is different than everybody else, so perhaps that changes, this is not the same person anymore as the Hedyet. So if the idea happens with a different person, yeah, so you don't have the Chet and the Yediyah of the same person. You can't bring a carbon anymore, according to Reb Shimon. Or no, we don't say it's a different person. Ki Ishtani Lavadai, that's Ishtani carbon today. That's only B'Shas, that's only the carbon that's Nishtana. But Avada, he's still the same person. And by Asham Tali, he brings the same carbon. Nasi and Hedi bring the same carbon. So Mamela, he should still be able to bring an Asham Tali. Teiku, this Shaila also, we don't have a teretz for. Says the Gemara, Tad Rabbanan, Nacha Braiso, Me'ama Oretz, Prat L'Mumar. Steht the Torah Me'ama Oretz? Prat L'Mumar. A Mumar is Mufke. He does not bring a carbon chatas on a shaygig. Shimon says, he says different drasha. How do I know this? Because it says, the Parish of Anasi, it says, Shalai Sesena B'Shgogo V'Oshem. Hashav B'Yediyosai maybe carbon al-Shigigosai. Which means that in order for somebody to bring a chatas, it has to be a guy who, if you would have notified him as he's about to do this mistake, you would have said to him, hey, you would have made him aware, it's chaylev, don't eat it. He would have immediately retracted and refrained from eating it. That's called a shav b'yediyasa, which means he's mamish, it's a real mistake. It's a legitimate mistake. So there he brings a chatas. But if you would have notified him as he's doing the aveira, that it's chaylev, and he never would have stopped, he would have continued eating it, that's not a shav b'yediyasai, and he doesn't bring a carbon al shigigasai. So we have two different mekayros. Tanakama says it's prat l'mumar, me'ama oretz prat l'mumar. Shimon says It's from the pasuk from Asher Loisa Esenu B'Shgoga VeOshem Ahoida Elav Chatasai, which means he has to be a shav b'yediyasa to be qualified to bring a chatas. Omer Amnunu Mumar Lechel Chelev Mevi Karmel Adam Ike Benayu. My Benayu, what's the chilek between the two makoidos? And it's the same halacha. Omer Mumar Lechel Chelev Mevi Karmel Adam Ike Benayu. Machlekes would stel itself ois, yeah, in a case of Mumar Lechel Chelev. And he's not a Mumar Lechel Dam. So suppose this guy, he eats chelev. Chelev is his expression of his independence, right? That's where he's expressing his independence and his rebelliousness. It's with chelev alone. But dam, he would never eat dam. B'mezid. So here we have a guy who was a Mumar Lechel Chelev and he ate dam b'shoigig, right? On the dam, Lamaisa, he's a shav b'yediyasai on the one hand. But on the chelev he's not. But he ate the dam. Yeah? L'maisi he's a mummer. Ma'amar, prat l'mummer. Does this guy the Shem mummer? Yes. He's a mummer lechel chelev. So he's mufka from the ganze parsha of Chatas. Umar Sover, but Reb Shimon says, no. The drasha is, you have to be shav b'yediyasa. See, each aveda, we're done separately in each aveda. Would he have been a shav b'yediyasa as he's eating the dam? Teretz says yes. So Agam is a mummer lechel chelev, but not for this. For them he's a shav b'yediyasa. Adam he is shav b'yediyasa. What do you mean? Rava says no machlokes on that. Everybody holds he's not a mummer ladam in such a case. Here we're talking about where a person is a mummer lechel nevela l'teyavin. Yeah, he loves nevelas. He can't help himself. He's addicted. He doesn't mean to anger God or to rebel. He can't be goyver in his yitzhahara. That's called a mummer l'teyavin. Is eichel nevela l'teyavin. And now, but here, he was nischalef. He was reaching for the shuman. He was ready to eat kosher. And by mistake, he got the nevela in his hand, by mistake. Now, for the nevela, he's a mumar. But in this act, in this scenario, this specific case, he didn't want to touch the nevela. He wanted to eat the shuman. So the question is, can he bring a chatas for that? So the Gemara says, "Ma'asav rakivin d'let to oven ochel b'mezid mumaru." Ma'asav rakivin de'ilu ashkach datera le'ochel di'asura lav mumaru. Yeah, Reb Shimon holds he would be a shav b'yediyaseh because at this point, in this act, he would have dropped the nevela because he was reaching for the shuman. The nevela he picked up was by mistake. So Meli can bring a chatas. But the Tanakama says no. Since he is a mumar l'tei oven, which is, he's calling it a mezid, so he's a mumar. That's it. So he's mufka from the parsha. Hagam in this specific case or scenario, he grabbed or he wanted to grab the shuman. Still, he's a mumar. Ma'ama oretz prat l'mumar. He can't bring a chatas. Told the Rabbanan. Says the Gemara. Told the Rabbanan. Achel chelev zehu mumar. A person who eats chelev is a mumar. Ve'ezu mumar ochel nevel s'chevish katzim masam b'shasi yayin nesach. Who's a mumar? Makes no sense, right? L'chayru. Gemara's going to ask in a moment. We say achel chelev zehu mumar. He just established it. And I told him, what's a mumar? Somebody eats nevelas, treifas, shkatzim remasim, and drinks yayin nesach. Because we have a whole other list. Rabbi Yoel Aimer afa levish kalayim. So the Gemara says, "Omar ochel nevela, ochel chelev zehu mumar. Ve'ezu mumar ochel nevelas. My kamer. What's the Bryce is saying over here? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Kamer achel chelev l'tei ovain. Hareza mumar lahachas hareza min. Tzedoki or a min. Min is Rashatevis B'Talmida Yeshu Nights. The different gesois over here. But either way, he's a min, and it's much worse than a mumar, right? A min, l'mashal, a min who writes Sefer Torah. The Mishnah Gittin says Yisaref. A mumar who writes Sefer Torah, it's you cover. You have to bury it. So a min is much worse. So the Bryce is saying like this: if he eats chelev l'tei ovain, that's a mumar, right? Just because he's hungry or he's addicted, he loves chelev. He doesn't mean to anger Hashem. That's a mumar. Lahachis, but he's trying to rebel. That's a min, right? Arezeh tzedaki. Ve'ezehu mumar de bestomai tzedaki. Who is considered a mumar that you can assume is a tzedaki? You don't know exactly whether he's a mumar, how to classify him. Anyone who eats shkatzim or masim or nevelas or treifas, yeah, anything that's not palatable. It's disgusting. You look at it, you don't even have a taiva to eat it, but he decides to eat it anyway. That guy is lahachas. Okay, that's how you can tell the difference. B'yis Yehuda adds, who's a mummer, even if somebody wears kalayim. My banayu, Lamai says there, a chilik Tanakama, and Rabbi Yehuda, what's he adding? Tanakama is giving you an example of chayla, but it means any aveira really, right? It's also kalayim. So what's the machlekes here? Kabanai kalayim d'rabanan. Mar savar midrais have a mummer, midrabanan lo have a mummer. It's only if somebody's over on a dvar Torah. Dover asim midraisa. Dover asim d'rabanan doesn't make him a mummer. Mar savar kalayim kivin the mefarsim isurei. Afilu b'drabanan have a mummer. Any iser d'rabanan that's mefursam and that's known to everybody that it's aser, there he is considered a mummer even by d'rabanan. Pliga baravacha v'ravina chadam l'te'avan mummer. Lahachas tzedaki, v'chadam lahachas nami mumar ela'ezet tzedaki kala'iv v'etz kechavim. So what's a min? What's a tzedaki? Question is he somebody who does avedis, shar avedis lahachas? Or no, even if he does lahachas, he's a mumar, it's only if he serves avedis zara. What says, Mesave ochel padesh echad, oyatash echad, that is a mumar. Guys eating fleas or mosquitoes, certainly lahachas, right? There's no taiva to eat that. But hochad lahachasu, and here it's certainly lahachas like a karli mumar. The Brisa says he's a mumar. Says the Gemara also the Omer etam tam di isura. No, over there it's not necessarily lahachas. Over there it could be he's just curious. He wants to know what it tastes like. So Mamela, we don't consider him a lahachasnik, and it's not a kasha on the man the Omer who says that lahachas is a tzedaki. This case is not probably a lahachas. Okay. Zug the Heilige Gemur begleitet the Mishnah Ezu Nasi Zamelech. Who's a Nasi? Somebody who's the Melech. Ton Rabbanon Nasi says Shenasi Yechta, the parsha of a Nasi who brings a soyer for a chatos. Yochol Nasi Shevet. Kanach Shemar Minadav. I would have thought Nasi here means a Nasi v'Shevet like Nach Shemar Minadav. Talmud Loimar Mikol Mitzvah is Hashem Alakov. Lahalon Oimer by a Melech, right, by the chatos of a soyer of a Nasi. It says Mikol Mitzvah Alakov, and by appointing a king, it says Laman Yilmad Liyiras Hashem Elikav. So Mala Alon Shein Al Gabav Elo Hashem Elikav. Afnos Shein Al Gabav Elo Hashem Elikav. It has to be somebody who doesn't have anyone above him. The only one above him is the Rabbeinu Shloim. That's it. So who's that? That's a king. Ashenasi Yechto. Yeah, and he did something. Mikol mitzvahs. Mikol mitzvah Hashem Elikav teaches that he's a melech. He's the only one who doesn't answer to anybody else except for Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi asked Rabbi Ki goynani mahu b'sayir. Ma'asam the Rosh Sanhedrin. Rabbi compiled the Mishnayos. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the greatest in his generation, said, if the Beis Hamikdash was Kayim, do I bring a sword because I'm a Nasi or not? Amar leis Rabbi Ki answered, what do you mean? Your tzara is in Bavel because you are subjugated to the Rosh Galusa in Bavel. They have more power. Gemara says, Esaveh. So Rebbe asked him, what do you mean? Malchi Yisrael, Malchi is David. Elu mavim la'atzmam, ve'elu mavim la'atzmam. Just because you have a Malchus in Bavel, there's Galusa in Bavel, and Am Eretz Yisrael, how is that different than Malchi Yisrael, Malchi Yehuda, that they ruled side by side, and each one was supposed to bring a Surah Lachata, so they made a mistake? Amalei, so he said, no, Hasam Lakaifi Adadi. There, they took a ruled side by side. They were equals. It wasn't that they were afraid from each other. Here, we are kafuf. We are bound to the people in Bavel, and therefore, the Rosh Galusa's power, he's got more power, he overpowers yours, and Mamela, you have to bring a regular chatas. It's amazing that Rabbi was the Talmud of Rebbe, and Rebbe's asking his Talmud. The Mishnah Soita says, Shemes Rebbe Batla Nova. Right? This is an expression of Rebbe's anivas. Tremendous anivas. Rav Safra Masnachi, Boimene Rebbe Merabchia, another version of the conversation. Rebbe asked him, what about me? Do I bring a sar as a nasi? Amalei, Hasam, Shevet Hachem Echaykik. So Hasam and Bavel is a Shevet, and over here it's Mechaykik. But Tanya lo Yosef Shevet Yehuda, Yaakov Avinu, when he benched Shvatim, he said, lo Yosef Shevet Yehuda Zedrish Goylish of Bavel. That's referring to the Galus of Bavel, Sheroides Yisrael B'Makal. He enforces dinam with a stick. He has the permission of the government whoever ruled, the Persian government or the Roman government, he has the permission to execute and to give the death penalty and so on and so forth, and you don't. So maybe he has more power. Your power is the Nesiya Sanhedrin, which is Rebbe Shemalamnin Torah Yisrael Barabim. So, but you don't have the type of power that Rish Galusa and Bavel has. So Mamela, you don't qualify, you don't fit the bill, the description of al mitzvahs Hashem alakav she'ein al gabav elo Hashem alakav. So the Mishnah, Ezu Mashiach. And the Torah says, right, Nasi is a melech. So who's a Mashiach? The Kohen Mashiach says the Mishnah, Mashuach b'shem and Mishcha. It's those who are Mashuach b'shem and Mishcha. Kahanim Gedolim in the first Beis Hamikdash, they had the Shem and Mishcha from Moshe Rabbeinu. Right, it was passed down, and they were in the Smana when they were anointed or appointed as Kahanim Gedolim. They would get anointed through the Shem and Mishcha. So only somebody, a Kohen Gadol, who had the Shem and Mishcha poured on him, he is a Kohen Gadol that is talked about in the parsha of Kohen Mashiach, that brings a par instead of a regular chatas. The Gemara says Veloy, so Mishnah Veloy Amruba Begadim. But in the second Beis Hamikdash, they didn't have the Shem and Mishcha. We'll see, it was hidden at the end of Bais Rishon. So Mela, the way they were in a Schanech was through Aruba Begadim. They put on the Shemona Begadim, and that's how they became Kohen Gadol. So he wouldn't bring a par. Ein ben Kohen Mashiach Shem and Mishcha Aruba Begadim ela par abo al kol mitzvahs. The difference between a Kohen Gadol that's Mashuach b'Shem and Mishcha and a Kohen Gadol that's Meruba Begadim is this halacha, whether he brings a par. Vein bein Kohen b'Shamesh leKohen she'ovar. The Kohen Gadol, right, the one who's active on duty, and he became disqualified temporarily because he had a tumah or a mumayver, whatever happened, and he couldn't serve. So the vice president had to serve, the Sgan Kohen Gadol had to serve for a little bit, and then they removed the Sgan Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol came back into power. So this Kohen Gadol, this temporary Kohen Gadol, says the Mishnah, he's exactly like the Kohen Gadol, except for Elo hapar b'yom kippur v'asidas ha'efel. Right? Once the temporary Kohen Gadol is removed, because the original Kohen Gadol, he comes back to serve, then the halacha is he's like a regular Kohen Gadol except for the par of Yom Kippur. He can't be makriv the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, and he also can't bring the minchas chavitin that the Kohen Gadol brought every day. They both can do the avodah on Yom Kippur. Yeah, Shneim mitzvah ala psula. They both cannot marry an almana, basura mal almana. They have to marry psula. They ain't matama b'kreveyem. They can't be matama to a mace to shiva krevim. V'loy poidem, and they're not allowed to grow their hairs. V'loy poidem, and they can't tear their clothing on mace. Or machzin or tzech, and if they die, the ritzeach goes out of the ear neklat. So either one of them, if they die, the ritzeach goes back home. Ton Rabbana Shem and Mishcha also Moshe Bamidbar. The Shem and Mishcha, the Moshe Rabbeinu made in the midbar. So it had a lot of besamim. The Torah says va'ato kach lacha besamim roish mar deroir kimon beisam eknei beisam kida. Yeah, the Shem and Zayas and v'asiso is roikach maser mirkachas maser ekayach. Yeah, you have to make sure that the Shem and Mishcha gets some of the smell, the fragrance of all these delicious besamim, the delicious smelling besamim. Says the Gemara. So how did they get the smell, the fragrance of the besamim into the shemen? Says the Gemara. They would cook the shemen in with the roots of the besamim until it got some of the fragrance. The Rabbi Yoel. He says, if you try to smear the roots with the shemen, you wouldn't have enough shemen, because the shemen was only shnei maser lug, the Torah says. It's not enough to smear the roots, let alone cook it together with the roots, and it'll absorb everything. You won't have any shemen left. What you did was, you took the roots and you soaked it in water, marinated in water, yeah, and then it was like a sponge. It got full of the water. This way it wouldn't be mavliya the shemen anymore. It wouldn't absorb the shemen afterwards because it's fully absorbed from water. And then you pour the shemen on top of it. Yeah, and then it got some of the smell from the surface of the roots, and then you'd smear it off the roots and you put it in a bowl, and that was the Shemen HaMishcha. What are you concerned about? Do you know how many miracles happened to Shemen HaMishcha? Rabbi said, the Torah says the she was Shnei Masalugan. And you know what? You know how much it was so little, and yet it never finished. You were able to be Moshech, the Mishkan, the ganze Mishkan, all the Kalim. Aaron the Bonav, Kol Shivis Mei Meluim. V'kuloi kaim l'osid lo b'shem b'shemen mishchas kodesh yezeh. This Shem Mishcha Mishcha Bet l'doyres and l'doyres sechem. Forever and ever. Says the Gemara, Tanya Idach. Yeah? Another brisa that elaborates on this conversation with Rabbi Yoel and Rabbi Yossi. Hikach Moshe Shem Mishcha Mishchas Mishchas Kol Keilah Vashid Kol Shaboy. Rabbi Doimer, Shem Mishcha Moshe Midbar Kamen Nisan Nasu Etchila Vat Soif. So many Nisan happened with the Shem Mishcha in the Midbar. Yeah, it was only 12 lugan. Or try to measure how much a pot, when you're cooking it, absorbs. And if you have roots in it, how much they absorb. How much the fire burns. And still, there was still left over from the Shnei Masalugan that the pot absorbed, that the fire burned, and the ikram absorbed. He still had enough to be Moshech, the Mishkan of the Keilah, the Aaron the Bon of Kol Shivs Melech, all the Kanim and Gedolim and Melachim, the Meshach Kol HaDoiris, this Shem and Mishcha Shnei Masalugan was enough. I feel a Kohen Gadol, Ben Kohen Gadol, Toan Mashiach, says the Gemara. A son of a Kohen Gadol becomes Kohen Gadol, also needs Mashiach. It doesn't go over automatically be Yerusha. The Ein Moshchin Melech B'Melech. But a Melech, yeah, his son does get to be Yerusha, doesn't need Mashiach. Why did they have to be Moshech Shloima Melech if you're telling me that a Melech Ben Melech doesn't need Mashiach? Because Adoniya was cholik on the Malchus, so to reinforce the Malchus with Shloima, so they gave him Mashiach. The Yoyesh Ves Yoyesh Mipnei Atalia. Yoyesh was the son of Achazio Melech Yehuda, and Atalia was the mother of Achaziohu. She was the mother. And Lamaisa, when Achaziohu, her son, died, his mother Atalia pretty much murdered all the descendants of the Malucha, and sister of Achazio basically hid him for 6 years in the Beis Hamikdash, and the 7th year came out. He was the only one left over from Malchus Beis David, and right away he was Nimshach Lamelech instead of his father. So the Gemara says, why did they have to be Moshech Yoyash? Tarot says, because of the rebellion of his grandmother Atalia. Ves Yoyachaz mepnei Yehoyakim she'gadol memenu shtei shanim. And Yoyachaz, they also were Moshechim, even though he took over Yashioah Melech, his father, because they gave him the kingdom. They coronated him as king before his brother Yoyakim was 2 years older. So okay, fine. Anytime you have to reinforce it, even if it's a Melech ben Melech, you do give him the Shem and Mishcha. Yeah, the Zeh is Shnei Masalugan. That was the amount of the Shem and Mishcha, and the same Shnei Masalugan stayed for generation after generation. That was the miracle of the Shem and Mishcha. Omar Mar, afilu kohen gadol ben kohen gadol to'an Mashiach. We just said, Kohen Gadol, the son of a Kohen Gadol, needs Mashiach Menol, and Dachsiv HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtav Mibonov, Name Akrov HaKohen Mitachtav Mibonov Mai HaMashiach. Why did it say HaKohen HaMashiach? Versteidach, I would understand that if he's taking over his father's place, Avad, it means the Kohen Gedolah. Why did it say Mashiach? We're talking about Mashiach. Kamash Malan, the Mibonov, the Kohen Gadol, you have Mashiach, have a Kohen Gadol, V'loi, have a Kohen Gadol. It's not enough to just inherit the Kohuna Gedolah. You also need Mashiach. Amamar, the Ein Moshech Melech ben Melech Minolan. How do we know that a Melech ben Melech usually doesn't need Mashiach? Amarach v'Yaakov d'chsiv l'man yarich yom ha'malachta hu bana b'kerv Yisrael. Yerusha hi lechem. It's Yerusha. Yeah? From hu abanav. from father to son. Menolam t'chi'ika machloikes by Mashiach. And how do we know that if there's a machloikes in the family or somebody else rebels, doesn't matter if it's the family or not, but at any time there's a machloikes, you do need Mashiach. V'lav kol de boya malka moides malchusa levnei. And the melech can't be moirish, the malchus to his kids, without Mashiach. Now, would you think that if the father says, no, I want this son to be melech, you think, no, he doesn't need Mashiach, even though there are other people who are opposing it. Another sibling was opposing it. Right? David HaMelech gave Shloima the malchus, and still he had to be nimshach because there was a brother who was opposing it. So how do we know that when there's a machlokes by Mashiach and the melech, the father, it's not enough that the father gives the malchus to one son? That's when the malchus is veres birusha. Afilu beloy Mashiach. That's when you know the Mashiach. But when there's machlokes, it doesn't go so naturally, and you need Mashiach. You have to be manen. Tana af yeyu ben nimshi loy nimshach elo mepnei machluktoi shal yoyram. So here we have a brisa that says yeyu ben nimshi was not nimshach only because the machloikes of yoyram. Okay, so Yehu ben Nimshi seems to have been somebody who followed the Dvar Hashem, and Yoram, who was the son of Achav, pretty much followed in his father's way. He was doing Ra be'enei Hashem. So the Gemara says, "V'teipiklei mishum." Why does the Brisa say that he only got the Mashiach b'Shem and Amishcha because there was a machlokes between Yoram and Yehu? L'maisa, he was the first one. He was a son of Nimshi, right? His father wasn't a melech, right? Elisha Hanavi was sent to make Yehu the melech instead of Yoram. Yoram was the son of Achav, and he was no good. And Yehu was regular guy. He wasn't the son of. He didn't have royal blood. So the Maisa, why does the Brisa say he had the Shem and Amishcha, was Nimshach Shem and Amishcha, because Yoram was chaylik on him? Tepik lemishim the Rishonu. He's the first one of the family, so obviously he needs Mashiach. Malchei Beis David Meshuchen, Malchei Yisrael Ein Meshuchen. There's no din Mashiach only by Malchei Beis David. Yeah? But you're not Moshe HaMelech from the rest of Klal Yisrael. The rest of Klal Yisrael doesn't need Mashiach. A Melech, yeah, doesn't need Mashiach. So Lamaisa Yehu ben Nimshi was from Malchei Yisrael. So why did he need Mashiach? Teretz is because there was machlokes between him and Yoram. So the Gemara says, Minolan, how do I know that you only anoint Malchus Beis David? Malchei Beis David, not Malchei Yisrael. Amarav Makra Kum Meshecheyu Kizeh Uzeh Ton Mashiach Vein Acher Ton Mashiach. When Shmuel came to Yishai and finally met David and saw him, so the nevuah was kum meshacheyu ki zeh zehu. So with darshan zeh ve'ein melech achar to Mashiach. No other melech from the rest of Klal Yisrael doesn't need Mashiach. Only David and Zerah Beis David, Malchus Beis David. Amar ma'afyehu benim shalem shechel machluk shel Yoram. Right? Im shemachlukta shel Yoram ben Achav nimoil b'shemen. If lamaisa there's no din to be Moshech Malchi Yisrael b'Shem and HaMishcha, so all of a sudden we're going to be Moyel behektish and use the Shem and HaMishcha just to reinforce Yehu's Melucha. That doesn't make sense. Says the Gemara, Kedumar of Papa, Bafarsim Adachia, Chanam Bafarsim Adachia. The truth is, they didn't use the Shem and Mishcha Moshe Rabbeinu. They only used Stam balsam oil, Shem and Afarsim, pure, clean Shem and Afarsim, and there was no me'il on that. Says the Gemara, Ve'es Yehoyachaz mipnei Yehoyakim shaygadol mimenu shtei shanim. We said that they were Moshech b'Shem and Mishcha Yehoyachaz. We wanted to reinforce his malchus because he was younger than Yehoyakim by 2 years. Because of Mikashish Minei was really Yehoyakim older than Avaksiv Bnei Yishio Avachar Yechon Hasheni Yehoyakim Ashlish Tzidkiyahu Arvi Shalom Omer Rabbi Yechon Shalom Tzidkiyahu. Hu Yechonan, Hu Yehoyachaz. So you see that Yechonan, the Bechar was Yechonan, but he was really Yehoyachaz. So you see Yehoyachaz was older than Yehoyakim. So how can you say Yehoyakim was older by 2 years? Says going no, the Olam Yehoyakim Kashish Umay Bechar LeMalchus. Doesn't mean Bechar chronologically was older in years. It was just older in terms of being king. How could a younger brother become melech before an older brother? If he's taka younger, why did they make him king before the older brother? So the Gemara says, Yehoidim was somebody who was mamala makam avoisav. Right? He was mamish going in his father's ways. He was a tzaddik. Yehoyakim, but Yehoyakim, who was not going in the ways of his father Yeshayahu, so Mela he didn't deserve the malchus, and he was skipped over. Yes, the Gemara says, in the pasuk it says Tzidkiyahu and Shalom separately. So how can you say that Tzidkiyahu is Shalom? It says Ashlishi Tzidkiyahu, Harvi Shalom. Sounds like they're two separate sons. You counting them as separate, right? Third and fourth. Chad kechosh. The Shlishi Harvi. The Gemara says my Shlishi Labonim and my Ravi Lamalchus the Mikar Malach Yachas or B'Sev Yayak B'Sev Yechani B'Sev Tzidkiyahu. Okay, it just means Ravi in the order of the Malucha. Doesn't mean as a fourth son, but really Tzidkiyahu was Shalom. Ton Rabbanon Shalom Tzidkiyahu v'Lukas Shmei Shalom Shemishulam B'Maisav. He was a tzaddik gomer and he's Meshulam B'Maisav. Ikadam Shalom Shalom Malachis B'David B'Yamav, because he was the last king of Mashmoi Matanya Shemoi. Shenem Yamlach Melech Bavlas Matanya Doida Tachta v'Yaseh Shmoi Tzidkiyahu. Maisa, he was given a name Tzidkiyahu, but his real name was Matanya. Omar Loi, the Nebuchadnezzar said to Tzidkiyahu when he appointed him, he says, Ko Yadzdik Olechos Adinim Timrei Bi. He says, if you rebel in me, Hashem made him swear in the name of Hashem he's not going to rebel. And if he's over in the Shvuah, he said, V'aviyeu b'vela, I'll come bring you to Bavel, I'll destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Ksiv v'gam b'melech v'nechanetza marad ha'shashbiyah b'lekim. In the end, he was married b'malchus Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, we'll stop over here.